Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Adam Interviews, where we are talking with folks normally from around here who are doing things of note. I'm going to venture outside of our region for just a moment here because I want to speak with an old friend and mentor, a former professor at Syracuse University. He's out in Missouri now, but Mehrzad Broujerdi was very influential in my college career as I was thinking of potentially being a correspondent in the Middle East. And I became fascinated by the history and politics of the Middle East. There was a book, I think it's called Peace to End All Peace. Highly recommend. Very impactful in my understanding of everything. But now with everything going on in Iran, I thought I'd bring Mehrzad back, not just because he's a historian and extraordinarily educated on this, but he's from Iran himself, and his family is from Iran. So with that, I want to welcome my former professor, Mehrzad Broujerdi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam, for having me. It's a pleasure.
So why don't we start with this? General thoughts. I mean, we're going to get to the politics of it, the details of what's happening, just your emotion right now that this is happening. Where is your head at with everything going on?
Yeah, it's really emotionally confusing, I think, not only for me, but for many Iranians. On the one hand, to see a regime that has, inflicted so much harm on its own citizenry, including what they did just a month ago by killing thousands of, civilian protesters. So to see the supreme leader of that regime eliminated, is sort of a cause for celebration, hoping that this 47-year nightmare that many Iranians have had to live through might eventually come to an end. On the other hand, one worries about wars, right? They're never clean. There are a lot of innocent people that get killed in this regard, and in this particular case, of course, there are also some serious questions regarding the legal justifications for such an attack by the Trump administration, considering that it was not authorized either by the UN or by the U.S. Congress. It might be on fragile, legal grounds to justify, this war. And yet, we also see that the war has really polarized the Iranian community inside and out of Iran, in the sense that there are those who are very much gung-ho in support of what has happened, because they think, on their own, they couldn't subdue the state. And on the other, those who feel that this is not going to bode well for Iran's future, that we have seen this movie before, how it ended up in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and the like. And therefore, there are concerns about whether this regime will survive. If it does survive, will it become more of a militarized, a state where the Revolutionary Guards really rule, and will have no hesitation whatsoever about crushing civil society or not. So, we are in the early phases of this conflict, and there are more questions than answers at this point.
So I'm going to brush off some of the teachings that you left with me, which is leading up to the revolution in the 70s, Reza Shah was the leader of Iran, and the academics and the religious bloc banded together and to overthrow the Shah. And then the religious bloc turned on the academics and said, "Thank you for your help. We're going to come after you now."
Right.
And so I've always thought the hope, I suppose, is that academic bloc is still there, and Iran being a very educated society at its core, that maybe there's an opportunity for those folks to retake power, or to take power for the first time, because they never really had it after the overthrow. Is that an opportunity? Where are those people now, and what's the thought process amongst that group?
Right. So you're absolutely right. I think it's important for an American audience to recognize what has happened in Iran since the 1979 revolution, right? At that time, Iran had a population of 36 million. Today, it's 90 million people. So it has more than doubled. Meanwhile, this population, for the first time in its history, has become predominantly, majority of the population have become educated and have become urban, right? And also the average age in the country is around 32. So this means that you are dealing with a young, urban, educated public that is also quite technologically savvy. There are more cell phones in Iran than landlines. Iran is not a North Korea, right? Contact with the outside world does exist. People can easily get out of the country, of course, when there is not a war, and so there is a strong sense of cosmopolitanism. There is a strong middle class there, and those academics, the intellectual class that you mentioned, are certainly there. This is an undeniable fact, and I think indeed when we look at the history of Iran and we see that, in 2009 and then 2019 and now again, 2022 and just last month, we have had major social movements in Iran demanding their rights. I think play to those demographic factors that I mentioned, right? So that's the cause for hope. That's the positive column. However, on the negative column, it also needs to be said that Iranian politics, unfortunately, has been a rather, a violent one. And, often it has been the guys with the guns who have managed to carry the day and emerge triumphant. And so, in terms of the current crisis, right, everybody is trying to keep their eyes on at one point, would the balance of power shift from one favoring an authoritarian state toward the opposition? What gives one cause for concern, unfortunately, is that the opposition is really not unified at the moment. Iran is a multi-ethnic society, right? There are Kurds, Baluchis, Arabs, etc., and it really does the collective action of all these groups to come together to be able to, put down the Islamic Republic. And at least as of this moment, it seems that the cleavages that exist among the opposition are still too profound to have allowed the Iranian opposition to form a unified opposition to tackle the state.
It's hard to believe that in a way history repeats itself, where it's going to require uncommon or disparate groups to come together and tackle this. And so I don't know how comfortable you are sharing this. You have family in Iran right now. What's the situation like for them and you by extension?
Right. So yes, my mother and of course my extended family are in Iran. And bombs are being dropped on Tehran and its suburbs and other cities all the time. So the government has cut the internet. So communication with loved ones in Iran is rather difficult, patchy. When you get a chance to find out how they are doing, and it's quite worrisome. Of course, your relatives there, they want to give you the comfort to think that all is fine, but you worry exactly how accurate that is. Of course, you are not in charge of your own destiny. You don't know when the next bomb might drop and how far it will be from you. So in a way, many, I guess, in the Iranian community are nowadays going through life like zombies, and you preoccupy yourself with your day-to-day life and work, and yet on the back of your mind you're thinking about what exactly is unfolding how will it be impacting, my immediate family as well as the rest of the country.
And what is it like for Iranian Americans or Iranian nationals living here in the U.S., generally speaking?
Yeah, again, that polarization that I mentioned is quite noticeable among this Iranian community living, outside the country, the expats, right? Remember, many of these people were either forced out or felt that the country was not the right place for them, but due to the restrictions of hijab for the ladies, for example, or what have you. So it's expected. People who their properties were confiscated by the Iranian regime, etc. People who came, like myself, to go to school and then found out that you couldn't really go back, to your country of birth, and then so it's expected that a large chunk of the Iranian expatriate community is dead opposed to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and perhaps in support of what is happening. But then again, there is that other segment of the population. Iranians, by definition, also tend to be quite nationalistic. They have an amazing historical civilization that people are proud of. Many view that the infrastructure of the country that is being damaged in these aerial bombardments do not really belong to the Islamic Republic. They belong to the entire citizenry, and therefore they worry about a rather fragile state that might remain the day after. Will the country hold together as a state, or will it start to sort of wither away as various inside and outside forces that might be pushing for such an agenda might really become active?
So I think it's important at this point to remind folks or inform if they don't know already that Iran is not part of the Arab world necessarily. It's part of the Persian Empire, the remnants of it. The vast number of people there are Persian, but obviously, as Professor Burjudi noted, there are Kurds. There are many other sects. Also, it's mainly Shia Muslim versus Sunni, which you find in like Saudi Arabia. So, Mike, I'm saying all this, Professor, because I was wondering how many friends out there does Iran have? Because as we've known, Iraq and Iran, there was the Iraq-Iran war. I mean, they don't have many friends in the surrounding area, from my understanding. Obviously, you could consider Russia an ally of sorts, but like, who could back them up here?
Right. So you see, what happened with the 1979 revolution was that a revolutionary state came to power in Iran, and of course it wasn't pro the status quo, right? They wanted to change the status quo to their own advantage, so they went after countries such as Israel, U.S. domination in the region, or anybody who they saw as being opposed to the message of a radical Islamic state. And therefore, that did not really endear Iran to many of its neighbors. And as a result, you had a devastating 8-year war between Iran and Iraq, two states where you have a majority Shiite population, ironically, engaged in a devastating 8-year war against one another. Because of Iran's anti-U.S. stand, right? So they started to gravitate toward other countries. In particular, they decided to put their hopes in China and Russia as their two strategic allies, to counter the U.S. and Western Europe. Unfortunately, it should be said that I think it was really a marriage of convenience, because as we saw during the Iran-Iraq war, and now we see, today in this conflict, and last year in the 12-day war that took place between Iran with U.S. and Israel, China and Russia are not the type of states that are willing to forego their own interest and come to the rescue of Iran, right? They value their own national interests and relationship with the United States much more, important, is more important for them than necessarily a state like Iran. They are friends for your good days and not necessarily in your moment of need. And I think the Iranian leadership is begrudgingly, recognizing that lesson. Furthermore, I think what Iran has done over the last 2 days is really quite shocking. It has started to fire missiles, right, at least 7 of its neighboring states, in the hope that by escalating this conflict, these states will put pressure on the Trump administration, and that will lead to an earlier de-escalation of this conflict. But by firing on places like Dubai, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, even their sole friend Oman, I think the Iranians might have shot themselves in the foot by creating a condition where for a long time to come, these states are going to put some degrees of separation between themselves and whatever remains of Iran. They might be fearful of Iran, a country of 90 million with a huge size. Iran is, bigger than Iraq and Afghanistan put together in terms of geographical size. But at the same time, they cannot allow Iran to disrupt, right, their day-to-day life, violate their national sovereignty by firing these missiles that are not just directed at U.S. bases in the region anymore. Again, over the last 2 days, we have seen Iran hit, hotels, malls, refineries, civilian homes, etc. in these places, which really does not bode well for Iran's long-term relationship with its immediate neighbors.
And I suppose if your interest, anytime you shake any cage in the Middle East, you risk broadening the conflict. And I suppose, could you look on the bright side that Russia and China have not rushed in to help because, I guess the goal, I would think, is to avoid World War III. The fact that they are isolated, could that make this easier in some sense?
Yes, I think in that sense, that's actually correct. Of course, Russia has its hands full with what's happening in Ukraine. The Chinese get a big chunk of their oil from the Persian Gulf region. So therefore, they recognize very well that a prolonged conflict in the strategic waterways of the Persian Gulf is not something that is advantageous, to them. So one would hope the Chinese are also using their leverage behind the scene to try to, find a solution to this conflict. Ayatollah Khamenei, before he passed away, he had threatened that if Iran was to attack, Iran will make this into a regional war, and it seems that they are indeed trying to do that. To what extent they will succeed in accomplishing that, it still remains to be seen. The Arab states, at least so far, have been reluctant to become, partners to U.S. and Israel in opening up a common front against Iran. But, I don't necessarily rule out the possibility that if Iran, let's say, continues to attack refineries and so forth in Saudi Arabia, that the Saudis will then enter the fray and fire missiles at Iran or do some things like that in response.
My assumption is that Iran is far from a paper tiger, and they do have the military and the might to put up some type of fight. What is their technological capability? I know when it comes to nuclear capability, it's been a subject of debate, but what do they have at their disposal at this point?
Right. So you see, Iran is a country where the educational system has invested heavily for decades on science and technology. Therefore, among these 90 million people, you have a lot, and I really underline the word a lot, a lot of very brilliant, scientists and engineers that have helped Iran, in terms of its defensive capabilities, be it the nuclear issue or the missiles. Much of it is now produced domestically in the country. So yes, I mean we are beginning to see that even though the supreme leader and many of the other high level military officials have been eliminated, they continue to fire missiles at all these targets, etc. And frankly, if there is one area of the Iranian state that has proven itself to be confident, unfortunately, it has been the security apparatuses. And therefore, I don't necessarily expect that we are on the verge of a regime change, despite what we hear from Washington. I think that's a maximalist goal, and it might be easier said than done. Accomplishing a regime change through aerial bombardments is never a good idea, never a realistic idea. And in the absence of boots on the ground, etc., and a more prolonged conflict, I have a hard time thinking that the conditions are ripe yet, at least as we are speaking right now, for a regime change scenario to happen. How long they can continue, whether they will eventually send a signal to Washington for a rapprochement and give some concessions on the negotiating table, quite possible as a way of trying to preserve what remains of the state.
That's so interesting. And obviously the goal, let me flip back to that. The goal here is, to have some degree of peace and whatnot. Should the regime fall and they call upon expats to come help rebuild the society, if you will, is that something that you'd be willing to do in some form or fashion?
Absolutely. So, look, what is interesting is that we estimate that something like, close to 6 million Iranians live outside the country. When we look, for example, in a country like the United States, you see that the Iranian American community is second to the Indian American community in terms of their wealth and level of education. These are highly skilled, highly educated people, very prominent entrepreneurs, etc. So same thing in Europe, Australia, etc. So if we do see a case of a regime change, the human capital, the financial capital of this Iranian expatriate community can be absolutely a positive force in terms of rebuilding the country, in the aftermath of the current round of war that we are witnessing and the infrastructure that will be damaged. As I said, Iran's positive point is in terms of its human capital, and it is quite conceivable that with the right sort of government, the country can account for a lot of the damages that have been done over the last 4 decades.
I think you said it best at the very top of the interview about having mixed emotions, and I think most Americans do as well, who they want the best for the Iranian people, and they recognize that the radical religious zealots controlling the country have not benefited the populace as a whole. And at the same time, the casualties, the civilian casualties, it's hard to stomach. War's hard no matter how you look at it. But, you look at, I think there was a school that was hit, according to Iranian media. And I guess that should lead to this question is how much can we believe from the Iranian government through their media?
To your first point, I think it's fair. It's important really for an American audience to know that this caricature image of reducing Iran to the land of crazy sword-swinging ayatollahs is one that we should really abandon. There is a major cleavage and separation between the regime and the ordinary, citizens. And, we have seen it repeatedly with expressions of sympathy in the aftermath of 9/11, all the way to today. on the part of the Iranian public. In Iran, unfortunately, the media is under heavy censorship, and the state media, of course, tries to present its version of the story. Fortunately, however, we benefit from the fact that there are a lot of Iranian expatriate TV channels that broadcast into the country and therefore manage to inform the public in terms of what might really be going on in their own country. That's it. But in regard to this particular tragic incident that you mentioned, yes, apparently there was some missiles fired at a girls' school that is sitting next to a military site. And the Iranian government is reporting that over 160 or so girls have died so far, many more injured in what happened in this conflict.
Yeah, and so moving forward here, my last question for you, Professor, is you kind of laid out the pros and cons, but what is the best case scenario, the most, but also one grounded in reality, but the best case scenario that you foresee to come out of this?
Yeah, I really hope that we get to a stage where the Iranian civil society, these social movements that have, presented themselves more in an episodic fashion so far, will become more consistent, right? And therefore are able to tip the scale in favor of the population. I'm hoping that, we will have at some point a more peaceful transition of power, in a place like Iran. I think it's important to recognize that even elements of the current regime should feel that they can live and have a next day that they and their families are not going to be necessarily harmed, so that they can put down their arms for a transition to take place. We might be far from it. As I said, I'm a skeptic by intellectual training, so I'm not yet convinced that we are going to see a regime change, anytime soon. But the handwriting is on the wall, right? The intellectual divorce between the citizenry and the government has absolutely taken place, and I'm hoping that those demographic factors that I mentioned will more and more dictate to the state what the average citizen wants, and therefore, we will see a change in approach, abandoning this hostile attitude toward Israel, the rest of the world, the imposition of hijab on the ladies, and on, having proper legitimate elections, and so on.
Well, Professor Baroujerdi, thank you for a lesson 25 years after our last one, when you were at Syracuse University. You're now at Missouri S&T, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And so I wish you all the best in the coming days. I know that you are sought after for your perspective, and I feel very grateful that you were willing to share it with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you after all these years.
Yeah. All right. Well, as Professor Baroujerdi showed us, you can be ageless in today's modern era. So very happy to gather his thoughts at this time, and we wish him and his family and everyone else in Iran the best. And we want to thank you, of course, for watching this episode of Adam Interviews. We'll continue to follow this conflict and bring you all the perspective we can on it. For now, though, please feel free to tell your friends and family about the Rochester First app. They can download it for free to most smart TVs. All right, take care.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.